Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, the way I sort of intended to run this, because I'm much more used to running it in person, is what I haven't done is I haven't done like a whole lot of glossy slides. I've set things up more as whiteboards. So like I've got some slides, but they're more for me to use to capture comments. So it'll be an interactive type of session. And then I guess what I'll basically say is I'll save those as outputs and we can distribute that to everyone after the session as well. But yeah, I guess it looks as though we've got about a dozen of us, so that actually might be a good size. It's probably not an overwhelming group, so I'll be relying on everyone to be involved, use your voice. But yeah, very happy if we want to start the recording now and sort of jump in. Does that suit everybody? All right, good. Lots of thumbs. So what I'll do is I'll switch now. I should be able to share my screen. So let me jump across. Probably have a moment of seeing all of your own faces. All righty. So can everybody see my screen okay? Yep, cool. So I think what I wanted to start with, and maybe I can just get rid of this because otherwise you're all looking at that as well, was just a bit of a open conversation. So when I say market sizing, what jumps to mind? Like what have you heard so far? What do you understand market sizing problems to be? Is this something where everybody's able to unmute themselves as well? I should probably check that. Yeah, cool.
I'm happy to go quickly, Nick.
Yep.
My understanding is I'm trying to look at a particular market, be it geographic, industry, and calculate the potential, the revenue potential.
Yep. So you're kind of thinking revenue potential. I think that's a really interesting question, interesting point to pose, because it is kind of like, well, what's the outcome you're shooting for? So like when you're trying to size something, you might be looking at it from a commercial lens. Are there any other contexts where people might think we've got to size something to inform action?
Sometimes you'll need to do it with segmentation, just to know how attractive those segments are. You need to sort of know how big they are.
And so when you say segments, what are the sort of types of segments that you might see?
Yeah, so a good example is one of the cases we looked at here was a TV station that focuses on travel. And, you know, they're looking at budget travelers and luxury travelers, etc., as their target market.
Yep.
And so in order to work out which of those is the most attractive, you have to firstly know how big they are, and secondly, know whether you can sell them stuff.
Yep. And size, and so in that case, it was kind of size and their relative attractiveness.
Yeah.
Has anyone got anything else where you think that you might have to size something for, you know, a non-dollars context?
Yeah, one of the other ones we looked at is sizing the population that you might be addressing. So the actual market for people and where, you know, who you're going to interact with, and potentially the competitors, other companies that might be involved in the industry as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So one that jumps to mind for me is if you've got to figure out something along the lines of vaccine rollout right now. So, you know, we need to quickly estimate, you know, potentially a number of doses that we need for certain, you know, critical classes or groups or something like that. So, you know, there can be non-financial, I think, applications to market sizing, or maybe it's something to inform project effort. You're trying to estimate something inside of a project. So, okay, how long is this particular activity going to take? You go, all right, well, they have to drill they have to drill this many meters. They're going to have this many pieces of equipment to do it. Based on those inputs, what does this then work out to be? So I kind of say market sizing can be a little bit of a funny steer, because a lot of times you practice these questions, and the questions that you see out there are like really financial, and then you get to an interview and someone might give you something that's actually not about dollars, and it's really just about, for me, kind of showing that you understand how to break a problem down into its constituent parts and show like value driver logic. So I guess the other kind of part of the question I'd ask is, when we talk about why do we do these questions, I think we've already sort of touched on it in here. So there's kind of like, you're looking to calculate revenue potential, but why in a consulting job would you look at that? So what's the particular sort of work context where you want to look at sizing the market?
A company might be. Sorry, you go, Rashmi.
It could be to help determine like where to put your greatest efforts in as well. So if you have such a limited time, you need to know where the greatest impact is, and you'll try to focus on that particular area by determining the relative market size of each of your solutions.
Okay, so that's an interesting one. So that's kind of back to the segmentation issue. So like you have limited resources, and so you're going to have to make segment decisions. And if you're going to do that, you're actually going to size all the different opportunities and go, where does it make the most sense for me to put my effort? I think that's really, really interesting. That's a good point of view. Does anyone else have thoughts on like a context where you might do a market sizing activity as part of a piece of work?
I was just thinking about an entry decision, whether you're going to enter a new market.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah. So I was leading you there because that is extremely common. So one of the things I've had plenty of in my career is Chinese company wants to come over and do same thing in Australia, and before they make a strategic move, they actually want to get some market validation. Confirm, entry is worth investment. Are there any other contexts that anyone can think of? So what I can do is I can share one. So it's not just entering a market. A lot of the times it's M&A. So that is absolutely the most common. So market sizing comes up all of the time in the context of a business acquiring another business, or a seller wanting to establish the case for why someone else should buy their business. So why do you think that the market sizing work would come up at that point?
To help determine, say, things like what's their market share at the time, what, how much they're worth, what's their value.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like growth potential, right? So for me, like the thing that I probably just want to touch on here is that a lot of the times market sizing is made out as though it's some sort of precise art form, and I just don't think that that's the case as well. Like really, what market sizing is it's helping you put some heuristics around decision making. And so in the case of M&A, like you'd be looking to acquire a business and you go, this business is achieving a growth rate of 30% year on year, and you're actually doing it to go, well, look, I'm never going to be able to like perfectly size the market, but if I put some assumptions around this and I give it a reasonable go, I should be able to get in the ballpark. And if I do, and I can see that you know, if this company grows 30% year on year for the next 5 years, it still only corresponds to 4% market share, then I've got a lot of confidence that, you know, the forward growth of this business is sustainable. But if I do the market sizing analysis around it and I go, well, hang on, I'm getting an implied market share of 95%, then I go, oh, well, actually, you know, there's a sign that the demand side of this equation is about to fall away. And so, yeah, really what I'd say is market sizing is something where why we do it, and why I think it comes up as an interview question is because it's not so much about being able to get to an answer with 3 or 4 decimal places. What it is it's about being able to take something that is quite kind of vague and rubbery and put some logic to it and not get obsessed about being perfectly correct, but to get in the right ballpark and give yourself heuristics that then inform decision making. So I think why I kind of call it out is, say, one of the biggest traps that I see is people getting really obsessed in false accuracy and trying to do things like too perfectly. In any market sizing, you are going to have to, even in the most sophisticated market sizing models I've ever seen, at some point the whole model is going to punch through some assumption, and what assumption you make there has the ability to move the model up and down by like 100% either side. And you've had to make an assumption. So what is market sizing? In my view, market sizing is taking a logic-driven approach to solving a quantitative problem, knowing that your answer is not going to be perfect, but the goal is to get into the ballpark. And why we do it? Well, we do it to inform decisions, and why we do it in interviews is to test people's thinking, to see if you can use logic, to see if you have tolerance for ambiguity, and to see if you have confidence to make assumptions. So where I think the questions that you'll get in a case book are quite different to the questions that you'll get in an interview, is a lot of the time, I think if you ask a question in a case interview, like problem book, they'll have prompts where if someone says a thing, oh, you get this extra information. But I've found that in interviews, you'll actually have to come up with the assumptions on your own, and you'll be made to squirm. So market sizing is not something where I feel the goal is for you to have the perfect answer. But the goal is to be able to observe someone use logic, to observe that person sweat mentally a little bit, and to make sure that they have confidence to actually back themselves and make an assumption, and use that as the basis for calculation. So that's what I just wanted to touch on first, is that I do think that there is a bit of a difference between sometimes what the casebook leads you to believe a market sizing problem is and what it actually is. And in many ways, the best way to practice these is to just sit down and go, all right, this is the thing I'm trying to size. Let me do a value driver tree for it, and let me try and practice the logic side of things, because I think you'll find that people are probably much less obsessed with the actual number and much more interested in seeing your logic. Does that make sense?
Nick, I've got a quick question. So in terms of, there's obviously a bit of leeway. How much is that, say, if it was the actual exact correct population was 10 million and you came up with 7 million, I'm guessing it's fine. But what if you were like at 5 million or 4 million? Where do you have to be worried about your accuracy?
Yeah, so what I'd say is I tend to find you probably what you'd have in that situation, right? So let's say, so let me just write this up because I think this is a good question. I want to capture it in the notes. So the actual correct population is is 10 million. Let's say instead of 4, let's say you come up with an answer of 1 million, right? So you're way out. What happens? So I think a lot of the time, the person in the interview there with you is actually letting you run the show, right? And so what I would normally expect in an interview setting is if that happens, that if you know heuristically that number is just way out of line, you go, that just doesn't seem right, and you can self-correct. So you've got the opportunity to self-correct, like based on sense check. But the other thing that often happens is a bit of a prompt. So like, how do you feel? How do you feel about that? Right? So if you haven't self-corrected and you're out on the answer by a factor of 10, I'd potentially go, all right, so that's the number you've come to. How do you feel about that result? And I think at that point you've got an opportunity to then go, yeah, okay, heuristically this just doesn't seem correct. I'm going to go through and I'm actually going to recheck my assumptions and have a think about the ones that are the most meaningful. And you go through it and you go, okay, so over here I've assumed it's 10% of people do this. I actually think that I must be wrong about that assumption must be 50%, or I've applied two layers of conservative assumption to get to my answer. And really, when I think about it, I should have only applied one. So I'd kind of say if you come to a bit of a shoddy answer, the first thing is when you produce, and the other thing too is the way I'll talk us through how to approach these problems. You shouldn't come to numbers until very close to the end, right? So if one of the traps can be getting hung up on your calculation in the middle of the case, don't do that. I'll show you how to not get stuck there. But you can either self-correct based on a sense check, or you'll probably, if you're way out, get a prompt. But if the correct population is 10 and your model that you've produced verbally in an interview is 5, yeah, look, I might push you to sharpen it up a little bit. But for me, like, you're kind of in the ballpark. If your logic's been good, I wouldn't really care there, because we probably both know that this is just rubbery estimation type stuff. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Cool.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? So Nick, if you really don't know and you're getting that prompt and you don't even really have any idea whether they're prompting you because it's high or low, or just wanting to make you squirm,
Yep.
I guess, is it about sort of talking through your logic and sort of talking about what parts of that you might want to get further data on to improve the accuracy?
Yeah, I mean, so let's let me just do your question here. So like, what happens if you get that question and you really don't know? Is that fair? Like, someone asks you that and you're just like, fuck, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
So my answer would be, don't panic. I know that's simpler said than done, but like, pause, right? Review. Because when someone's asking you that, yeah, there's chances that they are just shit stirring you, right? Some people go, are you sure about that? Just to see if they can shake you. Other times people go, are you sure about that? Because you've actually made a mathematical mistake. So your logic could be perfect and you've done 100 times 10,000 and you've gone, oh, that equals 3 trillion. Right? And then you've applied that through the rest of your value driver tree and you've ended up with a nonsensical answer, right? So if you've made a mathematical mistake, then you could have carried that through all of the way through your driver tree. So what I'd kind of say is, if someone says, are you sure about that? Maybe it's a bit of a question of, hang on, did I actually do that step after I calculated it to just do a quick recalculation and check all of my maths all of the way through? So I'd pause and I'd take that moment to review. And then if your answer is still the same, you go, yep, no, that seems right to me. And just be confident around it. And if you've genuinely miscomprehended the problem and your logic is entirely wrong, then you're not going to be able to redo the entire interview at that point. So for me, it would more just be double check for a mathematical error, and then replay it. I wouldn't kind of go down the route of trying to scrape the person for information. Does that respond to the question okay?
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what I thought I'd do. So let's just do a quick practice. I kind of think in one of the most important things in for me in learning to do these types of case problems properly is you kind of you might hear it expressed a few different ways in a few different places, but it's drill down before you build up, or it's go right before you go back left, depending on what way you structure it, you structure your analysis. But really the message I want to get across here is when you're doing the problem, do the logic of the problem first and get the logic completely done. So don't start to do parts of the calculation until you have your whole tree, right? So perhaps let's do this one as a bit of a worked example together. But if I said, all right, so what I want you to size is I want you to size the amount of glass in Eureka Tower, okay? Who wants to put a view forward as to how you might approach that problem?
I could start if you want.
Yeah, sure.
But happy for others to jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
I would start with what I'd estimate the number of levels of Eureka Tower first, to give an approximation of height, for example. I can't remember. I've been in Melbourne for how many years, but I think it's like 88 levels or 89 levels. Then I would start with, then I would go to how tall I would expect each of those levels to be, to give an indication. And the assumption here is that all of Eureka Tower's external view of all the levels is pure glass.
So what I want to do is I just want to do a quick pause here, all right? So what I think, just before we go into this a bit more, one of the things I think it's really good to do is as you're starting this out, so number of floors, think about what your unit is, right? So your unit here is, let me just do this. We've got 88 as your estimate. Your unit here is floors. So when I say the amount of glass in Eureka Tower, like what's our unit?
Look at meter cubed or meter squared, either one.
Yeah, meter squared. So I actually think this is something that's good to touch on is just make sure you ask a clarifying question. Like sometimes people go, oh, like amount of glass. Oh, we're actually asking to understand the mass. You go, well, that's just a weird question. but this is maybe not the right example for it, but sometimes there's actually ambiguity hidden inside the organising question where there is a bit of a trap to it, and you're actually meant to size something in dollars, or you're meant to size something in units. Are you meant to size something in square meters? Are you meant to size something in mass? Are you meant to size it in weight? So when I say the amount of glass in Eureka Tower, I think it's good to clarify. I mean, yeah, in this case, I mean meters squared. Yep. Or square meters, right? So if you then have a branch where you're going to have, so the other thing I'd just sort of say is as you break a problem apart, try to sort of have it in organized branches where you're only kind of combining two things at a level, 3 things if you really have to. Pardon me. My drawing skills aren't happening well today. But the reason I'm kind of giving the guidance to, sorry, this is just okay. Doesn't like me today. There we go. So the reason I give the guidance to say, hey, look, only have a few things multiplying at one node is because you want to be able to roll calculations up and down in a really simple way. So when you have an answer and that answer is A times B times C times D, that doing that calculation is actually a little bit tricky to lay out, as opposed to, all right, it's just A times B, and A is actually comprised of 2 things that feed into A. Do you see what I mean?
Nick, out of that example, then should you simplify the number of floors to make it a nice round number to say, you say it's 100 floors or it's 80 floors rather than 88?
It's completely up to you. I mean, if you think that your maths is absolutely fire and you know the number of floors, do it. Like if you think, well, hang on, we're going to be putting a lot of assumptions in this, and 88 versus 90 is really just kind of false accuracy, then say that and justify it, and just go, look, I reckon it's about 90 floors. And I couldn't tell you the precise number, and that's fine, right? But if you know, if it's actually something you know, you can lead with it. Just make sure you don't put a unit in there that's really tricky. So what I'm saying is, here we've got a unit of square meters, right? And we've got a unit that's floors. So we've already said we're going to start structuring this problem down to floors. So what is the corresponding unit that I need to get back to square meters?
So
if I multiply those 2 together.
The number of square meters of glass per floor, basically.
Yes. Yeah. So we're saying surface area per floor, right? So my question then is, you already know this, right? So you actually, this whole branch is now dead. You've got the number for that. It seems to me that you don't know this, and so this is now what you're trying to solve for. So how would you then break surface area per floor down?
I would go into what's the external, like outer facing versus internal glass.
Okay, so
like requirements.
All right. So we're going to say, so in this case, you've still got the same square meters per floor unit for both. So this is a sum function, right? I'm going to have my same problem with trying to get things to work in a tree. Right, so you got external glass and you got internal glass. And this is an add. Okay, so over to you. I'll scribe, you talk. Talk me through how you'd continue to break this problem down.
Okay, so with the external glass, I'd look at the height of each floor.
Yeah.
And the width, make an assumption around the width of each panel as well, to come up with it.
So why is the width of the panel important?
To come up with the surface area, because it's width times height.
So you mean, the width of the entire floor?
Well, I guess it depends on what shape the building is. So I can't remember what shape it is. I'm just going to assume it's a circle shape. So yeah, you just probably then need to come out with a estimate of what the circumference of that circle is, of that building, to then come up with the width. So we know the height, and we need to come up with the
All right.
circumference.
So I think I'd be happy to be corrected on this, but I think Eureka is rectangular. That was in my mind part of the reason to select
Maybe.
it.
Okay. Well, that makes it easier.
So let's just say we've got a rectangular shape. So we're still on external glass. So we've got the floor height, and then so what's your other dimensions you're going to need?
It's the perimeter. So height, width of the floor by length of the floor.
Yep.
So 2 times the width plus 2 times the length. Yeah.
So I think.
So you need to know what's the size of one of the 2 sides. So if it's rectangular, yeah.
So I think we're getting there now. So this is a multiplier. I'm just going to bring this to the front and hide it over. Sorry for my crap PowerPointing today. So what's the perimeter of the floor comprised of?
2 times the width plus 2 times the length.
Yeah. Okay. Is okay. Now, the fun part feels like we're down to the bottom of this tree, this branch of the tree anyway. What's the next thing we should do?
Work out what the actual so when just going back to the definition of square meters, we're assuming that it's like 2-dimensional. Is that right? The glass is 2-dimensional and we're not including any depth in that.
Yeah. So it's the units in meter squared. So surface area. So we define that. Define that as equaling surface area, so square meters. Do we think that this driver tree is complete?
Do we have to state our assumptions here about some of these numbers?
I guess my question is, are we there yet? One of the comments I made at the start was like, get your logic down before you start to put things in.
Well, I think we're there for the external glass perspective.
So we're not there for internal. So
no.
That's the point I'm trying to drive at. Is one of the things that I think can be a trap, right? So you get into this, and now you're starting to plug numbers in and do calculations. You actually don't have complete logic yet, and then starting to do calculations and then jumping out, redoing logic, doing another calculation, then sort of adding that back in. That's exactly the best way to make mathematical mistakes, rather than doing it all in sequence. And also, it's just not the way that I think people like to see it done. So you're still at your logic stage. You may learn something in the course of doing your full logic for another part of the branch, perhaps not in this example, that then informs your overall approach. So let's get the driver tree all of the way done. So how would you then go about building out this internal glass?
So I'd look at, I'd have a think about, make some assumptions around where there are internal components of glass, and that could be on, for example, in the foyer, or if there is a foyer, I don't remember, I haven't been there, or in the swimming pool. Yeah, someone said commercial levels of the building, but my understanding was that Eureka was a residential tower. So
I think that's fine. I would probably just say what you've done here is you've got a model that runs on a number of floors, right? So yes, you have a whole lot of complexity in the different floors could be used for different things, but this is the part where needing to be bold in making an assumption and in order to make the problem tractable is required, in my view. So this is the point at which I would be saying, yes, there's complexity in there, but let's have a bat. Like let's have a go. How would we think about this is what an indicative floor might be, right?
Yeah. So I'd probably make an assumption around how many like homes are there or how many apartments are there per floor internally.
Yeah. So got number of apartments.
Yeah.
Per floor. Yeah.
And then within that, I'd say how many bathrooms per apartment. I'm assuming that it's the bathrooms that contain glass.
Okay. So let me just kind of pull back here. So we have a unit on this branch that's square meters per floor. And we have a unit here that's apartments per floor. Now, I think your point about bathrooms is interesting, but I'm just wondering, is it at this layer of, should it be at this layer of the tree or should it be the next layer of the tree?
Sorry, so the next layer, sorry.
So if we look at this unit here, apartments per floor, what's the corresponding unit that you need to get back to square meters per floor?
So glass.
Square meters per apartment.
Got it. Square meters per apartment. So square meters per apartment. So what would you call that? Like what kind of name would you give that? It's just glass per apartment. So the reason I took a pause and I kind of ran you through the question that way is because I actually think that if you keep your units on things, you'll be able to I think more cleanly structure your tree, and then you don't end up with a situation where you kind of go, now I'm trying to actually multiply 5 things together at once without a calculator. So that's just for me, just a little bit of a tip of, if you keep your numbers laid out like that, then you should, if you keep your units laid out like that, Excel, PowerPoint, you're killing me. There'll clearly be a bit of a cleanup action for me after this to tidy this one up. So we've got a number of apartments with glass per apartment, and then glass per apartment, you're saying you're kind of looking at number of bathrooms per apartment?
Yeah.
Apartment?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the unit, what's the unit on that?
Just a pure number of bathrooms.
Just bathrooms, yeah. And then if you have square meters per apartment, what's the unit that you need to get from bathrooms to
glass per bathroom.
Yeah, great.
In square meters.
Yep. And this is now getting to the point where you can structure this out even further. If you want to, you can go, I've got glass covering the mirror. I've got I'm going to build, I've got 2 meters of glass for the shower. You can start to go through it that way. But this is also at the point where you're now at a level of granularity where I'd probably let you off the hook and just say, what's your assumption around that, right? So for me, now that I see a tree to this level, I'm much less sensitive to what numbers you actually put in there, right? So let me quickly try and tidy this up if I can. Blah, blah.
So Nick,
Yeah.
if at this point we said, look, a lot of kitchens have glass in them as well, but we're just going to make an assumption about the approximate amount in a bathroom, and the kitchen might be a bit of a rounding error here, so we're not going to include it.
Well, I mean, it depends on like how much time you've got as well. I feel like the sort of, so you can already tell we've sunk a bit of time into this so far and we haven't started to calculate yet, right?
Mm.
So if you wanted to, you could do glass per apartment. You could do like, you know, you could segment. So this is where the segmentation question I think comes in. You can segment that how you like, and you can go bedroom, bathroom. Like you could do a list and go bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. You know, go through all the main rooms that you normally have in an apartment, and figure it out that way. Or you can, I think, as has been reasonably fairly done here, go, look, I'm just gonna go, I reckon pretty much all the glasses in the bathroom. So I'm gonna do it off number of bathrooms, and I'm gonna ignore everything else. I actually don't really mind. I'd just rather hear, I just would like to hear someone tell me why they're doing what they're doing. So then I know it's not an oversight. And I think in this case it was pretty well verbalised. Look, I'm going to assume most of the glasses in the bathroom, and so that's the way I'm going to do it. So the only other thing I'd then ask is, are we done yet? Are we done now that we're here? Oh gosh.
So we'd need to include the functions for each of them, which I'm not sure we did. The multipliers for.
Well, just from a logic point of view, are we done?
Yeah, I think so, but I'm happy for other people to jump in and think if not.
Are we missing public areas? Like elevator lobbies and foyer and stuff? Well,
I guess it's a bit of a question for me about like, sorry, that's before I start answering. Yes, all right, that's one way to think about it. We could have foyers and lobbies, but I think probably the way we've been doing this is like, how can we have a simple model of thinking about it? So we could do that if you want. Probably introduces a fair bit of complexity. I actually think there's something more basic than that maybe needs to be asked as a question. Is there anything else on this tree that maybe isn't complete yet?
I'm interested in glass that's not actually fixed to the building, and whether or not that is something we should include.
I think that's a great clarifying question, and in this case I'd say no, I'm only talking about fixed glass. So yeah, and that's a really good point, right? Before you start building out a tree that goes down into internal glass, you probably want to ask the clarifying question, are we just talking about like external surface glass, or are we talking about external and internal? Because you can just imagine if the interviewer only has this branch and you spend all of this effort building this out, how much of a problem you'd be creating for yourself by making it too complicated. So I think fair question as a clarifying question. In this example, no, we're not looking at non-fixed glass.
Nick, my question here is the equivalence of external and internal glass. So the external glass is probably double glazed, which means it's twice as much. Is that what you were thinking here, or?
Yeah, but like in this case, we're sort of saying surface area. I'm just like, I actually think there's something that's on this tree right now where we haven't gotten to the bottom, right? So is there anything like that anyone can see that is not quite there yet?
How you estimate apartments per floor?
Yes, right? If you just tell me, oh, I reckon there's 4 apartments per floor, I'd go, why? Why do you say that? Because even in making an assumption around that, I actually reckon there's a heuristic logic running inside your head that tells you that, right? So if you have number of apartments per floor, what are you actually doing to figure out that?
I'd look at.
Oh, go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
I'd actually start by estimating the top tree in this case, because you need to know how big the building is first, and then go to the number of apartments per floor.
Yes. So my question is, do you need to estimate it when you're just expressing logic?
You don't need to.
You could still build out a logic tree off it,
Yes.
even if we don't know the answer of its area, for example.
Yep. So how would you go about that? Like how and
So
Yep, go for it.
I would use, say, for example, the top branch, so the width times the length again as inputs.
Yep.
And then come up with like an assumption around like therefore how many how large each apartment should be based on that.
All right. So let me pause there and ask you a question. All right. So you've got units here on this number of apartments per floor. That's apartments per floor, right? So what what you're driving to is correct, but what are the two things that actually multiply to get together to give, or divide together to give apartments per floor?
So average size of an apartment.
Yep.
And then a floor area.
Oh, damn. That was me trying to quickly clean something up and I couldn't do it. All right. So we've got average size of apartment. So what's the way that the size of an apartment's normally?
Square meters.
Meters squared.
Yeah, square meters. So to me, that one seems nice, juicy, because like there'd be so much just intuitive knowledge that each person would have around it, right? So like if I say to you, how big's a one bedroom apartment? So I'm actually posing that question to the room. How big would a one bedroom apartment be?
65 square meters.
Oh, it's a big one, better. But I like it. It's not out by a factor of 2, right? If I say how big's a 2-bedroom apartment?
80 or 90 square meters.
3-bedroom?
105.
Yeah, 100, 110. So like you actually have like really good data points in your repertoire already for the size of an apartment. So that's why I think it's a really good one to run with. So if you have that in square meters, what are you square meters per apartment, right? What's your corresponding unit that you need to get back to number of apartments per floor?
It's the total floor space of a floor.
Yep. And what unit is that in?
It's in square meters.
Square meters per floor, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So at this point, I actually think this is a pretty good value driver tree, right? I'd take your point. Floor space of floor, you'll have that once you have length and width, right? So you'll plug them in. But for the sake of real estate on this slide, I'm not going to draw that. But I think that that is actually a pretty robust tree. Now, one question I have is, where are there interactions inside of this tree? Where are there spaces where
top branch and that number of glasses per floor branch as well?
Yeah.
So floor space of floor.
Right. So what you've got here is you've got, let me do this as a call out box. So you need to have, so needs to be consistent with internal floor space calc. All right, so got that there. Is there anywhere else where you would be making assumptions and you need to make sure that you've got consistency of assumptions?
Would it be number of bathrooms if you're calculating it based on 1-bedroom apartments? Then you're obviously not going to have 3 bathrooms.
Yes, yes, yeah. It needs to be consistent with size of apartment assumption. And this is actually really this is a really interesting point. Is that where sometimes things go awry is you have contextually different assumptions running at different arms, and you can, if you don't pick that up, you could go, all right, well, number of bedrooms per apartment, bathrooms per apartment, I'm assuming 1, but then I'm assuming the average size of the apartment is 110 square meters because my model is a 3-bedroom. Then I've just underestimated that by a half, because I'd probably say it would be more accurate to think of a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom as your model there, right? So that's a really key point, where even in something that seems as simple as how much glass have you got in a tower, like you actually have to make sure that you've got contextually correct assumptions on multiple limbs running in parallel, right? So I think that's good. So where now, and as we move on to the next part of this, there are no wrong answers, right? There's just what do you reckons? So what's the next way we would approach this? What do you think would be the next step from here?
To put in numbers to each of these, the last column that we've got.
Yep. Okay. And so when you're saying let's start at the top, go down. So when you say the width, how do you justify what you're going to put in there as your width assumption?
If you don't have knowledge of the industry, it's really hard, because I know those buildings look much smaller from a distance, obviously, than when you're standing right next to them. Like, it's probably could be 30, 40 meters. I don't know.
Well, what's something so this is where I think it's good to have like heuristics that can't be argued with, that you can use to as a measuring stick, right? So what I've heard is like, oh, the Maya windows are 30 meters long, or well, I know how far it is from the 50-meter line to the goals on an AFL field, and I reckon it'd be about 1.5 of those, or something like that. So you don't necessarily have to have knowledge of the industry, but what I think is important is, even on a simple question, to be able to have some form of rule of thumb that you can apply, and so you're not seen to just be plucking a number out of the air. Because if you go, oh, I reckon it's 80 meters, what do you think? What question do you reckon you're going to get after that?
How did you come up with that?
Yeah. so like figure out your internal measuring stick, and in this case, so I'm throwing it open to anybody, anyone who feels confident. There are no wrong answers, but what number do you think should go there, and how would you explain it?
I'd probably say a city block is about 100 meters.
Okay.
And Eureka Tower takes up probably 80% of that block.
Okay.
So I expect it to be about 80 meters, yeah.
Yep. So 80% city block equals 80 meters. And so what does that then leave us with for our input here?
160. Yeah.
Okay, so 160 meters. So I've got 160 meters here. All right, and What's thought on length?
The same. We'll just assume it's a square.
Yep. Okay. I don't mind that. Assume it's a square. Okay. So I got that. So what is the next? Having heard me harp on about things, where do you think I would be wanting you to go next in terms of what you put in?
The next tree, so the consistent bit where you want to keep it consistent with the floor space.
Okay, yep. So you're wanting to go to average size of apartment here?
No, the floor space or floor.
Okay, perfect. So how are we working that out?
So that's length times width.
Okay, so we've got so we're going to say consistent with outside dimensions.
Yep.
So I'm going to reduce the size on this one. So we've got 80 times 80 equals what, 6,400?
Yep.
Cool. Meters squared. Okay, cool. And what's the next input we want to put in?
Just the average size of the apartment.
Okay. So what type of apartment are you using as your measuring stick here?
I would say a 2-bedroom apartment. Because
Yep.
we've got some 3s, some studios, some 1s, and hopefully it'll average out to a 2-bedroom.
Yep.
And 2 bed and 2 bathroom.
Yep. So 2 bed, 2 bath, and that should be what sort of square meters?
I think it should be around like 90 square meters.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to know what apartment building you're in because it's generous.
So the older apartments, I would say, are a bit more generous.
You're absolutely
The
right.
later, 2010 plus are probably not.
I'm just teasing. I'm completely okay with that assumption. So that's fine. So we're saying 2 bed, 2 bath, about 90 square meters. It's a luxury building. Maybe they got a little bit more living area. Let's roll with it. Okay. So now we've just used 2 bed, 2 bath. Where do we want to pop next?
Number of bathrooms, which we've already sort of decided.
Yep. For consistency. And hang on, let me just. And yeah, so your glass per bathroom is your last one there. So how are we reaching a point of view on that?
So it's basically the shower screen and the mirror makes up most of the glass.
Yep.
So the shower screen would be about 3 meters by 1.5 if it's a floor to ceiling, or we'll say 3 meters by, so 4.5 meters squared. And then the mirror might be 2 by 1, so say 2 meters squared. So
we're just gonna go 6.5.
No,
I don't mind that. Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, you've verbalized it, so that's fine. So it's like what we say. We had the shower at 4.5, mirror at 2 meters squared. Okay, cool. So what's left to do?
Multiply and add up everything.
Have you got all of your far right arms of your tree done?
We still need floor height.
Yep, spot on. So what do we got there for floor height?
I'd say 2 meters.
I would have said 3.5, 4.
So here's my question, guys. How have you come to that?
I'd expect the floor to floor height to be basically a really tall person can just maybe reach the ceiling, so 2.5 plus all the services and the slabs and stuff. So you end up with a bit over 3 meters, 3.5.
Okay, so you got 3.5. So that's fine. I just want to put it to you that like expressing yourself in that way is totally fine. It's but plucking the number and going, oh, I reckon it's 3.5. That's not fine, right? So so now that we're here, to be frank, the rest of it's just maths, okay? But I think you can see how even in like a really simple problem, it's actually quite a bit of thinking to do. It's quite a bit of logic, and there's quite a bit of testing your logic internally. So what I think would be a really boring exercise is, as much as it might be gratifying, is for us to go through this calculation together now. But perhaps it's just worthwhile, when you do have some practice, to pick something like this. Maybe pick a commercial building, so the internal is a different scenario, and give it a go doing it for yourself. So what I might do is I might just take a pause and move on from there. But before I do, did anyone have any questions or reflections now that we've done that? Things that you've seen work well, tips that you'd want to share with the team?
I guess just a quick question was, the shape of the Eureka building is such that the upper floors are a lot smaller. So how much do you think that might be considered that you're leaving something out of your logic if you didn't mention that?
So let me just make sure I do justice to your question. So the Eureka building gets smaller at the top.
Yep. And it's could be quite material. So
you're diminishing answer by not considering that.
Yeah, because you'd be overstating it, I guess.
Yeah. So my counsel on that would be try to use blended assumptions. Okay.
Right.
So if you know that it starts, like if it starts wider at the bottom and it gets more narrow at the top, right? Then go, essentially you've got a trapezoid. You can go, I know what it is at the top. I know what it is at the bottom, right? Mathematically, the midpoint of those two should be the average. If I assume that it was moving upwards in a consistent linear way, right? So if you wanted to add that, you go, look, I think at the top it's 40 by 40, and I think at the bottom it's 80 by 80, right? Then you would take a midpoint between 1600 and 6400, and say, I think this represents like the correct blended average as far as my length by width assumptions. That could be one way to do it. Or you can say, up to this level I'm going to use this assumption, above this level I'm going to use that assumption. You can get a little bit more nuanced, but I would kind of say you're getting into a level of detail where it's probably not commensurate with the setting that you're in. Like you're there in an interview, you've probably got 30, 40 minutes. Don't make your life harder if they're not going to make your life harder.
So you don't think they would look at this and they would say, you're getting down to all this detail about bathrooms, but it's actually false accuracy because the shape of the building is something that you haven't considered?
Well, but I mean, I think what I'm getting at is you've acknowledged that there's external and internal glass, right? And you're trying to come to a viewpoint around that. So if you have a concern, right, that the shape is wrong, then I'd say, well, look, your width and length, you're using the bottom. You know that the top's more narrow. Then you talk it out and explain to me how you're going to use a blended assumption here that moderates for that, and that would be fine, right? Or if you if you feel strongly about it, you can use an assumption for half the building and another assumption for the other half of the building. The reason I don't say it, I'd say that I don't think that it's necessarily a false accuracy thing, is because the whole purpose of the internal glass and building this out is to just see the logic.
Okay.
Right. So if you said to me, look, I think external is the meaningful part of it, and I reckon the internal is negligible, I go, why? And you go, oh, well, I just think it is. And go, yeah, but why? And whereas if you show me, oh, I do internal glass and I add all this up, and then you can, and then having done all of that analysis, this is ultimately only 3%. I go, all right, well, that's actually a good finding. We know that for next time. we just won't worry about that. But until you do that, all I have is your opinion. And yeah, I'd probably need, I'd say I'm more interested in how you think than how accurate you are. And if you can show me the logic of how you break that down, I think you get more points from that than from being super precise about external shape. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I'll just say, theory, read the room. Read the room. If it doesn't add, answer, don't do it. Most interested in your logic. Okay. All right. So I think that we tied a decent amount of time up on that one. So I'd probably be interested to just kick along to make sure I don't miss any other things I want to cover on. But did anyone else have sort of a question or a comment that jumped off that?
My only comment on this is like doing the maths for some of this in your head is going to be like near on impossible unless you're like Rain Man and can divide 6400 by 90 and add 6.5 or whatever and do the multiplication. So would you say it's better to use like whole numbers or round numbers just to make your life easier as you go forward and do the maths?
Yeah. I mean, to level with you, the long division of 6,400 divided by 90 is 640 divided by 9. So I kind of feel like 9, what is it? 7 9s is 63. Plus one more gets you 6,390. Like I think you're I think you could lay this out in long division and actually do this. Right. I genuinely believe that none of the maths on here is of the type where you couldn't do it. I think you can add 160 and 160. I think you can multiply 3.5 by 320. I think here you could do it. You should just make sure you have a scratch pad that you're doing long division on. Do your long division on and get the number and put it in. Right. And your sense check for that is going to be, 6,400 divided by 100 is approximately 64. So it's going to be 64 plus a bit of change, right? So I think you can do it. Just take the time to do your long division. Do it on a separate piece of scratch paper. Fill it in. But part of the way you lay it out is to make it easy for yourself. So if you had all of these things operating on one branch and it's like A times B times C times D to get to the answer, then I think you're making it hard for yourself. And you're also making there be so many units to keep consistent that you could have things fall out of sync. So that's why my advice would be keep it to, 2 things, maximum 3 per node if you can. Exactly for that reason, because I think if you've got things that are round to a 10, right? I'm not asking you to say that the average size of the apartment is 73 meters squared, but I think you should, if you're using reasonable assumptions, you should be able to do the maths. All right. So my call out there would be, is if that makes you feel uncomfortable, then just do targeted practice on long division, on long multiplication. and get yourself feeling comfortable there. Like going into case interviews, maths is not the thing I struggle with, but I like to tell people, try and make sure you know what your spikes are, and you know the things that you're trying to just be equal on. So for me, maths was something I wanted to be a spike. So I actually, on top of doing case interview practice, I'd do like 30 to 45 minutes of maths practice, just maths practice a week to get my speed up, so that, and what I found was in interviews, if I could show that I could smash quantitative problems pretty quickly, they'd actually stop giving them to me later on. So it was, you actually can build a reputation around your maths pretty quickly. So I take your comment and probably respectfully disagree. I think you can do this maths, and I think if it is your personal concern, just put a bit of extra effort into it. Doesn't have to be a spike, but just make sure that you're comfortable with your long division in multiplication. Right. Is that a good point to park this one up and push on? Is everyone comfortable with that?
What did you use to guide your maths practice, Nick?
You can just, have you seen the Victor Cheng site? I don't know if it's still the same.
Yeah, I haven't looked at front. Yeah, okay. Yep.
Yeah. So mate, just do the fast practice, right?
Yep.
Do the timed practice and just go hard and try and do them quickly. Like what I say is don't try and do them for 100% accuracy. And I'll tell you the reason why. Try and do them quickly and then see which ones you're stuffing up.
Yeah.
And which ones you're stuffing up then actually gives you, this is the type I should focus on. So try and do them as though you're under pressure and trying to impress someone and see which are the type of questions that keep tripping you up. And then you go, great, I know I need to focus on that, right? So that is my advice on maths. Again, just know what you're trying to spike on, know what you're trying to be at equivalency on, but you'll do yourself such a disservice if you have spent 50 hours on case practice and then you're making mathematical mistakes. It's not a book. So I'll push on. So I had a bit of a slide here that was talking about proxies. So I think with our previous example, it's good because it's nice, clear maths. But yeah, I think there are things like where you need to somehow try and figure out how to proxy an input in. So we've already touched on this to some degree, but when you just have to come up with the number, like what is it that makes you sound credible when you're having to put an input in? So kind of put it to the room a little bit, but what are the sorts of words that would give you a sense, would give you less confidence that thought has gone into something? So if I start with bad proxies, if you're doing a market sizing case with someone and you ask them, how did you come up with that? What's the sort of language that would alarm you?
I guess.
So as soon as you hear the word,
It sounds right.
It sounds right. Yeah, this is going to be a fun activity. Sounds right. What other things sound a bit flimsy to you?
I guess that.
I guess that. Yep.
I reckon.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my go-to. I reckon. Anyone else? Like, are there any things that you reckon should go in the sin bin? Stuff that you just should.
I feel. A feeling.
I feel. Yeah. So what are the sorts of words that we can use that kind of help convey a sense of confidence, or like when you're expressing yourself?
My estimate is double.
Well, yeah. So to some degree, like I guess that in my estimate can be intersectional. So how would you start a sentence? Like if you wanted to show that there'd been a sense of logic that is going into what you're about to say.
Based on something.
Based on. Yep. What other sorts of words?
I would be thinking of saying, I know that. So for example, you said, I know that the 50-meter mark is about the same as this.
I know that, therefore, yep. Is there anything else? Gosh dang. I should really just use the quick alignment tools rather than drag things. This is very non-consultant of me, but I'm using my mouse trackpad, so please forgive me.
Start with, if you think of X, then
Yep.
Y.
Yep. Yep. So, following the logic that, so I think I just wanted to touch on this quickly because we did cover it slightly in what we just did, but even in your way of talking, the way that you internally talk to yourself kind of channels the way you think about things. So if you start with, okay, well, based on, then you're setting yourself up for success in that sentence, in my view. If you say, I know that, then you're using logical language. If you're kind of going, yeah, I reckon, and you get into a habit of doing that, or using that type of language or falling into those sorts of habits, then that will come to sting you, in my view. So yeah, when we're talking about sort of good proxies and bad proxies, the way you use language actually means quite a bit. So I don't need to dwell there too much. We sort of touched on it a little bit through the course of the last exercise, but I just felt that was an important thing to touch on because yeah, I think that is like any of the things on the right are like a red rag to a bull as far as giving the interviewer a license to give you a hard time. So if you just go, oh, I reckon it's about 80, or I feel like it's about 30, or I would guess that it's about 20, you're going to get a follow-up question. Someone's going to absolutely drill you. But if you start your sentence with anything on the left, then just by the way that you've begun to express it, you actually are forcing yourself to have to articulate some sort of logical framework for how you're arriving at that number. And a lot of the times what I find is all of the things on the right, there's actually this process going on inside your head. So like when you ask someone, oh, how many passengers can you have inside a car? You go, oh, I reckon, the average is 6 or 7. You go, well, actually there's a process occurring inside your head that you need to break down. You go, well, actually, based on 2 different types of cars that I use as my reference point. One is a sedan, which is 2 seats up front, 3 in the back. And the other, which is a bit of which is a SUV people mover that's maybe got the 2 and the 3 and then an extra 2 for the kids in the back. That's a 5, that's a 7. It's a mix of the 2. I call that 6. Like you actually have, when you say, I reckon, you have a process inside your head that's already run. So just take the time to articulate that, and I think that you'll be setting yourself up for success. Does that make sense? Just as a quick point of language to talk about. Okay, I'll assume that it does because that was a bit of a soft point. I'm going to skip over this one. I just sort of put some things in here, but this might just be some good little brain exercises to do if people want to break away and do some cases. But what I wanted to talk about was kind of consumption-based driver logic versus replacement concept. So has anyone heard of replacement concept in market sizing before?
No.
No? Okay, cool. So if I just want to do these to sort of like the first layer of logic. But if I said like how many soft drinks are consumed in Australia per year, like what are the things that we're actually multiplying to get to that answer?
Population, or a segment of population.
Yep.
You'd be thinking of the consumption, consumer spending habits as well. So what is people's propensity to spend on soft drink, for example?
So I think that's
not consumer goods.
I think that's all important detail in terms of having an A+ answer to this. But at like the really, really core level, like when you have a consumption-based thing, right, you've got population, which you've correctly identified. So that's, people, number of people. And what's the other thing that you've got on your branch?
Proportion
per person.
Yeah.
Spend per person.
Or like, I mean, I've just expressed this in drinks, but it's like drinks per person per annum, right? So the thrust of your analysis here is your population's probably going to be pretty much at your fingertips. So you're trying to find like a detailed way of articulating, here's how I've come to a good assumption for the number of drinks per person per annum. So I might look at segmenting that and say, these are the segments I want. But one of the things I just want to call out is on population. Well, first of all, what's the population of Australia?
About 25, is it? 25 million?
Yep. 25 is fine. If I told you to segment that population by age, would you know how to do it?
We're top heavy. There's a lot of we've got an aging population. So you'd say I don't know, like 40% would be in that upper bracket from maybe like 40% would be from 50 up, and then you'd work your way backwards.
So let's just as an exercise, I'm going to pull this up and we're going to look at it together. All right. So because assuming it hasn't changed since I was in my MBA. I think what you'll find, yeah. Here we go. Yeah. So if I take this image, I just paste this in and I turn it on its side, then for me, I actually reckon that population is pretty much like this up until an age of about 60. And then it's a triangle. How's my shape work going? I'll figure it out. All right, I've done poorly here, but anyway, it's a triangle. Thereabouts, something like that, right? So for me, if I send this to the back, not too bad. Send this to the back. Not too bad, like reasonably good approximation, right? So for when it comes to population problems, one of the things I just wanted to touch on is if you go, it's a uniform distribution up to an age of about 60, and then it drops away linearly from 60 to about 90. After 90, everyone's about dead. Let's just go with that. Then you can actually size these components. So this is worth up to 60 is worth 6 units, and from 60 to 90 is worth 1.5 units. So you've got a population like of 7.5. So you can actually like cut slices like by using that. I'm a little bit out of date in terms of my ability to articulate exactly what I mean here, but I have absolutely in case problems used that to when you've got a problem where you've got a population and you're now going, I've got to come to the right assumption. oh, I want to do this behaviorally by like people under the age of 10 don't consume any soft drinks. That's my assumption. People from the ages of 10 to 20 consume this many, from 20 to 50 consume this many. Then you actually have a population distribution where you can work it out, right? It's a little bit complicated. You'd need some practice with it, but I'd just sort of throw that in there as a bit of a good to great tip. Because yeah, I guess your question is on something like this where you've got the population at the number of people, and you're going, oh, but the behaviour is really variable by all these different segments. Slicing it into groups by age is actually one of the easiest ways to segment something. And if you're able to do something like this quantitatively, where you can tell me, right, there's 25 million, I'm calling this 7.5 units. So it's about 3.3. So every 10 years is about 3.3 million, up to about 60. And then it drops away in this linear fashion. And I just call my 60 to 90 like one segment that's about 5 million people, right? So if you do that and you can show me like really smart ways to do your segmentation, I'd actually probably give you a heck of a lot of leeway in terms of the assumptions that you use in each of those segments. But if you have crap segmentation that you can't explain to me, then not only am I going to test you a lot on that, I'm also going to be very skeptical about the assumptions that you're putting in against each of these segments as well. So that's just a little tip as to how you could do it.
What if it's a bit more complicated than that, and you have to estimate something which is I don't know, what's an example? Maybe based on race. How would you go about doing that? And just without, obviously you've practiced that, and that's a very reasonable explanation. But if you don't have, you have to come up with an explanation on race. How would you use that similar logic and come up with an explanation like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say if it's something that you couldn't possibly have at your fingertips, then you'd ask the question. And if someone says, no, I actually have no information around it, and you're needing to cut like a macro population into racial groups, then you go, look, the only microcosm I can use is my MBA cohort. So in my cohort, we have about this many people. There would be X many, I guess race is always a charged example, but there would be X many people of this background, X many people of that background. And so counting that out against the denominator, I have these percentages. So I'm going to assume that that's reflective of the broader population. That may be a heroic assumption, but that's the one I have. And I'm going to apply it that way. Like, at least then you have talked me through a logic for how you've arrived at it. But I would think it would be very strange if someone gave you a really odd dimension to segment on, and you were expected to just know like X percentage of people in Australia are of this ethnic background. I think that would be unfair of the person asking the question. But what I would say is the population that's out there and the overall shape of the population being something that you could segment. I have explained this in an interview, and it was extremely well received. So I do know from personal experience, like trotting that out, that's something that does work, and it does get you kind of runs on the board as to how you might go about segmenting something. But things where you're sort of being nudged down a corridor where you've got to use like a really idiosyncratic way of segmenting a population, like I'd be asking, do we have that information? And if we don't, then you're just going to have to figure out a way of creating a basket from your own experience, which is not, in my view, that's not actually a very good case problem. I wouldn't want to push someone down that path, but yeah, I can see heaps of questions though where you get asked something about consumer behaviour, and you have to somehow come up with with an input, and it's a heck of a lot better if you at least have some sort of segmentation methodology. So the point of this one was by population, consumption-based problem.
I guess the good thing about age segmentation is that lots of consumption behaviour is really strongly linked to age, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting that, like, so because financial strength in life, the number one thing it's correlated to is age, right? So, 21-year-old student statistically is going to have less money to spend than someone who is well progressed in their career. It's going to be the single biggest thing that drives the money that someone has access to. So I do feel that age population segmentation is probably an important one to just know, just have that in your back pocket and know. The reason I the answering question for this was, this is like a consumption-based problem. And so when you have a consumption-based problem, you're asking questions about how people behave, and the population number you should know. Then you're going to have to figure out how to segment it. And if you know this, then you should at least be able to have some reasonable conversation around segmentation, in my view. Your other segmentation that you might then do is male-female, right? And that one's pretty easy because you can just assume 50-50, even though it's slightly higher female, right? I'd just kind of say consumption-based problems, segmentation, this is the level of detail I think you would want to know going in. Anything beyond that is starting to get into funny land. You could maybe, if you wanted to have something extra at your fingertips, you could maybe have income bands, and know going in like what percentage of the population sits in different income bands. But I actually think population by age tends to work pretty well. So I just wanted to touch on that. It's just like a consumption-based problem. Yeah, you'd kind of be segmenting down into different groups of people. You'd need to then put the populations against them. You'd need to kind of set some behaviours against them. But it's a much richer conversation to be able to say, yeah, look, I reckon, people in the 0 to 4 or people in the under 10, like if they're consuming, I'd just say, let's make the assumption they're not consuming soft drinks. And you can do that and you can just wipe that off. So I've probably said enough on this one, but before I move on, did anyone have any questions or comments or things that had fallen out of other case examples that they'd done that was relevant to that?
So I guess we're most familiar with Australia, but when we're sort of given other countries to come up with, these sorts of age or population questions, do we sort of just I don't know, pull some numbers out of somewhere? This is, something which I struggle with sometimes in terms of relative population size of random, like obviously not China, obviously not India or Australia, but some of the other smaller countries that you get. Yeah,
look, it's a good question, because I think you'll get case book examples as well where the case has been drawn from like the Kellogg book, and so it's been conceived for an audience where everyone's in America. Like, I would say that most of the time when you get a problem like this in an interview, the interviewer is doing most of their work in Australia too, right? So I would think that knowing Australia to a level of detail is good. Look, understanding the population size in China, understanding the population size in the US might be two other data points to have. Being able to segment those populations, no, like I think that would be an unfair expectation of a candidate. But if you were asked that question and you thought segmenting the problem was the way to go, and you didn't and you didn't have anything to go on and they gave you no data, then if you knew it for Australia, you could at least say, well, look, one thing I do know is that this is the structure in Australia. And so based on that, I would assume that it's similar, and therefore I'm going to use that as my basis. Right, so at least then you can articulate, I have something I'm drawing upon to answer this, rather than getting to a point where you're completely stuck. So yeah, when in doubt, if you know one really well, just say, well, look, this is the one I know, and based on that, I would estimate it's about the same, and that would be fine for me. But yeah, it would be a very weird question to ask someone to estimate segmentation in Uzbekistan. It would just be bizarre. I wouldn't ask a question like that. I'd much rather ask something that's more of an Australian context, and then at least I can see how you think, rather than test your rote knowledge of overseas populations. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right, so that was just kind of population and consumption-based problem and how you'd segment it. So I think that's enough time on that. Replacement concept. So I just want to quickly touch on here. So if I have a problem that's around the number of car tyres sold per annum, how do we get to what drives demand for that? And I guess there's a hint in the name, but yeah, what would drive the number of car tyres sold per annum?
I guess I'd be trying to think about how many car tyres there are and how long they last.
Yeah. Like in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah. And life of a tyre. Right, and so that's exactly right. So a replacement concept problem is one where you're asked to estimate something, but it's a durable good. So effectively, it's something that everyone would have, but how you get to the problem is around this years of life issue. So it's one of those things that sounds like it only comes up in interview problems. So I go size the Australian tyre market. But I actually had this in a due diligence setting. I did due diligence for a company that wanted to buy a company that manufactured garage doors, right? And so garage doors are one of those things that you install, and then what drives the need for a new garage door? The fact that the old one's broken. So replacement concept problems are an interesting subset of market sizing, and I think the only other thing that I'd say to this is, where do you think the trap might be? So if we've got number of car tyres sold per annum, and we look at the number of tyres that are already out there and the years of life, where do you think the other level of detail in a problem like this might be?
It's missing new cars and things like that.
So you've got new cars. New car demand. So there's actually that sort of branch that needs to come in, that level up, where you've sort of got replacement demand. So, and this is like what I'd sort of say is net new as well, because you could replace a worn out car and effectively you're replacing 4 old tires, but it's about kind of the overall sort of incremental fleet size that exists out in the country has expanded, right? Interestingly, I had a market sizing issue for a client on centered around sort of this exact concept. It was around a client that wanted to buy a company that manufactures specialized trucks. And so the question was, well, what is the demand for these trucks? And really the answer was, well, we need to figure out how they get used in industry, because they're in very heavy industry applications, and how long they last. because we can get a pretty good estimate for how many are out there. But the real thing that affects the size of this market, the amount that you get to sell per year, is how many break in a given year. So that is just kind of touching on replacement concept to just say that that's another sneaky one. And the one that almost always gets missed is this net new box. And you might, so for something like that, if you wanted to do net new, I'm just mindful of time, so I don't think we should chew through this too much as a worked example together. But if you wanted to use net new, how would you estimate like what is driving net new car demand? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Population growth.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's right. So population growth. So you're effectively saying the growth rate of this market, we're just going to index it based on population, right? We know population because that's one of the things that we're going to make sure that we have in our fingertips going in. It's around 25 million. And I guess it's probably been knocked around a little bit lately as far as Australia goes, because we've got all these COVID impacts. So I probably wouldn't have an up-to-date assumption around it, but does anyone have a sense for what the current Australian population growth rate is? We can Google it again together.
There was a report released pretty recently.
Where are we at? Okay, so 1.13%. Okay, so it's pretty low at the moment. So I'll just maybe pop that in as a snip. Right. So I think that's just the sort of thing to just have. So if you had a logic that you're working out to sort of say, all right, well, there are this many cars out there. So we've got 25 million people. For argument's sake, it's one car per household. A household is 3 people. I'm going to call it 8.3 million cars out there. This is all just very, very high, incorrect logic. So I've got 8.3 million cars, and as the population grows at 1%, I should have 1% growth per annum. So I should have, if I've got 8 million, what have I got? I've got 80,000 new cars per annum based off 1%, right? And that gives you a net new contribution from that. And interestingly, when it's a really big population, sometimes that can be quite meaningful. If you have a big population that's growing by a little bit, and you have a good that lasts a really, really long time, this can actually be a very meaningful part of the market. If you've got a good that's very fast turnover, so for argument's sake, assuming everyone is replacing their toothbrushes at the right intervals, you have like the number of toothbrushes sold per annum, then your replacement behaviours should dominate because each person would churn through multiple toothbrushes a year. But if you had garage doors, your replacement would be quite weak because they might last 20 years and your net new becomes very meaningful. So that's one thing to just bear in mind on a replacement concept problem. What do you think is another thing that might be a little bit of a trap inside a question like this? Number of car tyres sold per annum.
Like what you're thinking of as a particular segment. So you might fall into a very particular part of the market and you might not think of the broader market. So if it was like a more general question of how many number of tyres sold per annum, you might think of only of cars or only of trucks, but you might miss some of the other types of vehicles. Let
me ask you a question. Like if you were to segment two groups that own cars, what are 2 main groups that own cars?
Private and commercial.
Yeah. There you go. So that's another little bit of a trap too, is just kind of like, private and commercial vehicles, right? And your growth rate. Do you think your growth rate for commercial vehicles is necessarily going to be the same as private vehicles, or do you need to? I mean, it would be defensible if you did use the same assumption, but if for argument's sake you knew the growth rate and the number of Australian companies, and you had that at your fingertips, and you knew that was a higher number than 1%, then you could plug that in down there, and you could have a different assumption tailored to this branch of the tree. So that was just one sort of call out there, as to they're very simple problems that get deceptively complex rather quickly. So I'm just sort of mindful. We put it in as a 2-hour session. I think we've we've got about 10 minutes to go. I felt like probably the best thing to do at this point was to just me to stop talking, and maybe what I can do is just have a bit of a time now for just general Q&A, tips and tricks. Does that work for everybody? Or have I lost everyone?
That sounds good.
Excellent. No worries. Well, let's jump back to the panel chat. So first question, was what I covered today useful? Do you think that will help?
Yeah, I found that really helpful personally. Yeah.
Okay, good. If you didn't feel like you got what you needed out of the session and you don't feel comfortable asking it as a group question, please do send me an email, and I'll do my best to point you in the right direction. But I think that hopefully that should give you a bit of a framework and a toolkit, and I'll do a bit of a polish up on the slides, and I'll kind of send those out as part of this as well.
So Nick, I had a question around setting this out in a case interview setting. So I guess oftentimes these are just posed as, give me this answer to this market size question. And are they in that sort of scenario, are you allowed to once again draw out these logic trees on a paper and present it, or is this more an internal model in your head that they want you to talk out?
Oh, write it down.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
If someone gave that, was able to do that in their head, first of all, I'd give them a round of applause. But at the same time, I'd think that they were pretty stupid, because you're taking a heck of a risk if you don't write it down. And also at the same time, it's not a very articulating that you have structured logic is not easy without imagery, in my view. So if you can show the linkages between what you're doing, that you've structured everything out, and then when you're talking through your calculations, you're talking about how they flow back up through that logic, then I have to think that you'll come across as a very structured person. The risk of doing things in your head is one, you make a mistake. 2, you come across as though you're not taking it seriously. And 3 is a little bit of is this person a bit of a maverick? Are they kind of a fly by their seat of their pants type personality as well? So I think you'll find that in the main, most consultants really respect people taking the time to write things down, to get it clear, to if you're in person with someone, one of the things I also say that often gets lost is people do their logic and then they talk it out. I like to turn the sheet around and show the interviewer and talk them through. Once I've written it down, go, so this is how this all works through to the result, thinking about what's more engaging from their point of view, as opposed to, okay, so I did this and then I did that and then I did that. Make it more of so if you see what we've done here is this and that, and this is how we've got that result, and this is how it all links together. I think it's just a more engaging experience. So my advice would be absolutely write it down, even if they're not interested in seeing it. I think it'll keep you on the tracks.
Nick, what are your thoughts on, say we had to do it via Zoom? Would you do kind of what you've done with PowerPoint, or would you then simplify it just so that you can speak as you're doing it?
Yeah, well, I guess part of the thing doing it by Zoom was it was an interesting dry run for me. I hadn't done it that way before, so I guess hopefully you can see that there is a way that it can be done by Zoom where you could share it and you could walk someone through it, and hopefully, you know, for your own experience in this session, Jason, that, like, I guess the test to answer your question is, if I had just done it on a piece of paper in front of me and I had just talked to you all and not shown you that for the whole 2 hours, would you walk away from that thinking that you got like the full value out of it, or would you feel pretty chipped? And I think you'd probably feel a little bit shortchanged. It depends too on the interviewer. So I will say, so I moved firms about 6 months ago. So I've been through the interview process quite recently, don't you worry. And I did do everything on paper in front of me. There wasn't the interest so much from the interviewer to see it, but I did do it, and you know, that's how I talked it back. And from time to time, I probably tried to show the piece of paper to the camera and do it. So you'll be constrained by the setting. Like if the interviewer hasn't thought about it and they haven't set that up and they haven't got a facility for you to be able to do it on a screen and share your screen, then yeah, you're just going to have to do it on a piece of paper and talk to it. But yeah, if you've got the, like, if I guess it depends how they set the test up. If they set the test up in such a way where they just want to test you verbally and you have to work on your desk, then that's what you have to do. If they set it up and they go, by the way, I've got a Miro board and we can have a play, you go, oh shit. All right. This is what we're doing now, I guess. I've had in-person interviews where someone's asked me to do it on a whiteboard as well. That was a fun one. And I've had ones where I've just been able to do it on a piece of paper. So you're going to have to be ready to go with the flow of how the interviewer sets the environment up, I'm afraid, I think is the answer that I've come to talking myself through that.
Actually, from that, Sandeep just sent me a message in the chat saying he did an interview with Deloitte, and they asked him to hold up the calcs, so yeah, to like show them. Yeah.
Really, and you've like got to take a snapshot.
They asked me to hold up my notebook, and then the second round last week they asked me to do it in Excel in front of them. Yeah,
okay. So there you go. They're perhaps a little bit more avant-garde than my most recent interviewing rounds, but yeah, I can say yeah, Andrew, I completely agree. It'd be nice for the pandemic to be over. It's so much easier to do this in person. But I personally, I've been there right there with you. I did all of my interviews with partners and performance by teams, all of them, and they're all very. And while they weren't market sizing problems, they're all value driver logic driven problems. So exactly what I've shown you in terms of structuring out a tree and breaking the boxes apart, like it was those sort of problems where you think the logic is really what they want to see. So it's not nice. It's much nicer doing it in person, but also it splits the field. So, you know, people who haven't done the practice and absolutely fall to pieces in a big way on teams. You can't coast on charisma and people skills the way some people do in an in-person interview where they do all the rapport building shit at the start. So yeah, it changes the dynamic a little bit and it rewards those who practice, I think. So you're all here for a reason. You're all getting your edge.
A quick question on the sizing and given time, but how about consumption questions around market sizing where you might want a demand curve and there's a price element to it? How would that normally play out in an interview? How would you approach that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that I'd say is market sizing is there to test thinking. And what I would say is probably if there was a curve aspect in sort of interpreting what this means side of it to the case, there'd probably be a part where you're doing the market estimate, and then they go, great, now that you've done that, I've got some more information for you. And then they show you like, here's what I've done earlier one, and go, this is what the curve is. So it's more like, I want to see that you can do the logic, and if you can, I'll reward you with part B of the case. It's kind of rare that you have a case where you've got to, I haven't seen it, where you've got to do like a market sizing, and then based on the market sizing, you've got to then build all of these other complex things that hang off your answer. I tend to find that there's a very clear line drawn.
So Victor Chang, in one of his things, he talks about, you should be able to draw these demand curves. And I kind of haven't seen it really in an example.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Market sizing is, I want to know that you are comfortable and assertive. You can deal with ambiguity. You can structure your logic. And yeah, if there's then like quantitative questions that hang off the back, I'd be much more comfortable going, yeah, great, now that you've done that, that's excellent. We actually have a report from some consultants that covers this. Here's their report. And I'd find that the case probably being much more delivered that way, because, yeah, you could have it such that someone's done the problem and they've done it with really good logic. There's just been one or two numbers that have gone into their logic that are a bit shit. And then they can't actually do the entire second half of the problem. So as the interviewer, you'd actually want to manage that risk by probably saying, yeah, there's a point where we pull up stumps, and I actually then just give you artifacts to test on the other stuff I want to test on. It's kind of like in mathematics where, if you make all these consequential errors that flow through the thing, I don't want you to necessarily be punished if your logic's really good because you made one mistake at the start. So I haven't seen that. I haven't seen like do the market sizing and now build me all these artifacts off the back. I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, cool.
Nice. Excellent. Anyone else have a query?
I had a quick one. So given that it's essentially a logic structuring exercise, to what extent can you sort of spice it up with industry knowledge or things like that? For instance, in the car tyres, I had a car tyre replaced recently. And there's actually a huge demand for car tyres because everyone deferred servicing during lockdown. So can you sort of like go, oh, look, and it's high, demand's higher at the moment because of this, so I'm going to round the number up. Can you get brownie points doing that, or do you just steer clear given it's...
Oh, look, I think always good to speak through broader context. What you're talking about there is an interesting thing. It has come into market sizing problems that I've done for clients where you have a demand supply imbalance factor. So I would probably, what I would do is if there was something like that you really knew, then I might sort of break that off and say that we have this extra factor that we want to just put into our answer and be mindful that it's temporary. So what I've done is I've calculated the steady state, right? One thing I do know is that we're going to have an extra factor for the next 2 to 3 years that's going to be this big. I know that it's there, and I'll put it in as an extra loading factor at the end. That might be a way that you could deal with it. So I had that, actually, the example I spoke to before about a specialised truck manufacturer, where the market had, like, similar thing, the market had boomed, and because the market had boomed, that was saying about the growth rate of the size of the pool can actually be quite meaningful when you've got something with long life. So the growth of the size of the pool had gone up quite a bit, so there was this lag to catch up with fleet sizes. There was this mismatch. And so what you could predict was actually that there was undersupply for a period of time. There would need to be oversupply for a period of time to catch back up. It's all very interesting context. And for that client, I did take that into account. But it's very it's very tricky to express in a driver tree, and it's probably a temporary effect. So I would try and work out things on a steady state basis, and then if you want to add extra little flourishes at the end, that might be how you do it, but perhaps do it consultatively with the person. Say, look, one of the things I'm aware of is we've got this. So one of the things I could build into here would be this extra little factor that deals with that. Would you like to see it expressed that way, or would you prefer to see it expressed more on a long-term steady state average, and actually get a buy-in of the person you're interviewing with to make that modulation? Because then if they go, nah, I don't really care, it's kind of like, well, they're basically telling you, cool story, bro. Like, it's great to hear all of your industry context, but like, stop polluting your logic with all of this extra stuff to just show off. Like, show me your logic, and yeah, then if I care later, we can talk about the flourishes at the end.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, putting it at the start scares me, because like, you might look awesome for having extra knowledge, or you might just ruin the logic tree. And multiply all those things up if you put it at the start.
Yeah, I reckon go steady state first, and then you can almost go, actually, like, I like the dumb is smart approach. You know, like, as you get close to the end, you go, oh, one of the things that's occurred to me is we've got this, like, and I've already got this really good value driver tree, but like, we could plug something in here. How do you feel about it? And most of the time I'll probably go, don't worry. You've done a great job. I don't need you to add that extra little bit in. I appreciate you raising it, but it's all good. If someone's a real sadist, then they'll go, yeah, go for your life, buddy. Plug it in. Redo all your calcs.
You know, I spent 20 minutes on this tree.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So guys, I do have to run, but I really enjoyed the session with you all today, and I want to thank you for being an engaged audience and doing that as a participative exercise. I will tidy up, the slides that we've run through, and I'll send that out. But I do just want to say I genuinely mean it when I say if you have a question that we haven't been able to cover in the session, or something occurs to you after the session, reach out, and always happy to help or have a chat.
Thank you, Nick.